Part of that's required, Peter, is you're going to have to sacrifice. If you're going to prepare, you got to get up earlier or you've got to spend time reading and prepping. You have to sacrifice more than the people that are not in a leadership role. And if you're not prepared to do that, then don't raise your hand.
Welcome to the Biz and Life Done Well podcast, where we explore what it means and what it takes to do business and life well. I'm your host, Peter Wilson. If you're like me, you're intrigued by stories of common people who have achieved uncommon success in business and life. Join me as I interview fascinating people about how they got started, their successes and failures, their habits and routines, and what inspires them. Today, my guest is Jan Rutherford. He is an executive coach, entrepreneur, podcast host, expedition leader, and a former CEO and Green Beret as well. Today, we are going to be talking about his book titled Becoming a Self-Reliant Leader, How Grit and Disciplined Duty Forge Indomitable Teams. When is the book coming out, Jan?
August 20th, a week from today.
Great. Well, I can't wait to dig into this. But just a little bit about your background. You have been, maybe your career started in the military. Is that true?
Yeah. Well, as a 17-year-old, and I did my 9 years before my 27th birthday. And I thought when I got into the business world as a 26-year-old, I thought I was way behind. That's how I felt, that I was way behind. But boy, it was a great beginning. I really created the framework for the rest of my life. Little did I know at the time. I was so young, so naive, but was luckily exposed to some phenomenal leaders right off the bat as a teenager. It really changed my life. And it's probably one of the reasons I believe in the American dream, that you can come from nothing and make something. And I look at the basic training photo that was taken in 1979 at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and I look at that platoon, and it was so diverse: Black, white, Hispanic, and women in the platoon. And when I reflect back, what I remember, all of us were 17, 18 years old, and we were all exactly the same. We were poor, and we were soldiers. But none of us, I don't remember seeing color, race, gender, sexual preference. I don't remember seeing anything but soldiers that were in civilian, people that were trying to make a better life for themselves. And this was in a period where there was no GI Bill. There was a GI Bill during Vietnam. It was suspended. So there wasn't even a GI Bill. There was a little bit of a savings incentive account for college, but many of us thought this is our ticket.
Wow.
9 total. Yep.
Quite a commitment at that age. I had what I consider to be my boot camp experience at that age, which was nothing like what you're talking about, where I worked in Alaska on fishing boats for 5 summers.
That's tough work.
And well, little secret, in the summer, it's kind of like summer camp. It's long hours and things like that, but nothing like the commitment that you put into that. But it seems like there's this formative experience that some of us have the opportunity to have. We don't even know it at the time.
Yeah.
And it's a great opportunity. Of course, it's one thing to have the opportunity. It's something to make the most of the opportunity. It sounds like you made the most of that opportunity as well.
Yeah. And again, here, hits and misses. I mean, there were high points and low points, as there is in any career.
Yeah.
When I got out, the first job I had was as a pharmaceutical salesperson in California. And boy, I thought I threw my life away. I went from being saluted. I was an officer at that point. And then I was groveling to get 30 seconds with a cardiologist. And I really thought, what the heck did I do to my life? But now I look back, I mean, that was another one of the best things I ever did, was get that sales experience and to really understand business from a customer's perspective. And today, what I hear from clients over and over is, I wish I could find somebody that could close deals. I mean, finding people that can actually close business these days is as rare as a unicorn. And I really attribute my success as an entrepreneur to those years I spent pounding the pavement, literally wearing out shoe leather, literally having a hole in my shoes.
Embracing the suck.
Exactly. And but I remember thinking, I'm paying my dues. I'm paying my dues. But
Yeah.
man, at the time it felt like, am I going to ever pay my dues? Am I ever going to get to the cool parts of a career?
The main reason we're here today is to talk about your new book, Becoming a Self-Reliant Leader. I got a pre-copy of it. I was able to review, and amazing book. I want to start at the title, this idea of being a self-reliant leader.
Yeah.
I'd like to have you define self-reliant leader.
I'll tell you the origin story. And again, it kind of goes back to the Army. Being an 18-year-old in Special Forces training to become a Green Beret, we were on patrols. It was the dead of winter. We're exhausted, starving, freezing, and you're following somebody that's in charge because they're being graded as a leader. And at any moment, they can put you in charge. It could be at 3 a.m. All of a sudden, hey, the leader's dead, you're in charge.
Okay.
And so, in order to get people to follow you, you've got to be a good follower. If you're a jerk, when it comes your turn to lead, nobody's going to do it and you're going to get a bad score. You're going to fail. And what I remember most is when it was my turn to go, I remember thinking, I can't lead these people if I'm not squared away. And by squared away, I mean, I'm fit, I'm mentally sharp, I've got all the stuff, I know what I'm doing. Because this leadership is not about you. You've got to take care of your people. And so the whole idea of being a self-reliant leader is you've got to lead yourself. You've got to take ownership, because then you've got to create a shared ownership and a shared sense of duty with the team. And then you've got to really focus everyone so there's alignment when you lead the organization. So it's not just about you becoming self-reliant. It's a contagion for other people to be self-reliant so that everybody can really focus on the mission. It's not, hey, there's a weak person over here and we've got to basically carry them.
Mm-hmm.
And in the work world, we can't see that. We're not on patrol. We're not climbing a mountain. And especially in a hybrid remote world, how do we know who's carrying their weight, who's not? But again, you still have to be squared away so that you can take care of other people, so you can figure out, are we getting the job accomplished, and how's everybody feel about that?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully people are going above and beyond. And again, I think that's one of the marks of a leader. If you've got retention and you've got people that will go above and beyond, you're probably leading effectively. You've got people that are doing the bare minimum, which we read about in the Wall Street Journal every single day. You're probably not inspiring people very well.
One of the things that I've found as a leader, when I first was in a leadership position, found that I was a reluctant leader.
Mm-hmm.
I achieved a position in an organization that I was co-founding. First, I was a bit of a reluctant leader. I wanted to co-found a company. I didn't want to become a leader of people, right?
Yeah.
So I was very reluctant at the time.
When you go in the Army, what's interesting is you're 17 years old, 18 years old, you're being trained to be a soldier. But from day one, you're trained to be a leader. Hey, if the squad leader gets killed, you got to step up. And it's really remarkable that the succession planning starts first day of basic training. In all the military academies, which I did not attend, all would say we're the finest leadership institutions for training leaders there is. And we know in the work world these days, succession planning is terrible. We're not selecting some of the right leaders to advance. We're selecting people that are good at their job.
Right.
We're not giving them the tools. When I had such a great opportunity in a big pharmaceutical company where when you were in the development program to be a manager, a leader, they spent so much time teaching you how to interview, how to select people, and how to coach people, develop them. And that was repetitive. And honestly, the training I got in the pharmaceutical company was better than the training I got in the military on how to select and develop people. And it was repetitive, it was creative, but there was a lot of role plays, and everyone hates role plays. Everybody hates them, but there is no substitute. There just isn't. I mean, when you're practicing dealing with people, you can read all the books you want, but if you don't have somebody that's coaching you and watching you and you're practicing skills at the beginning, it's really hard to get better at it.
The book itself, Becoming a Self-Reliant Leader, has this theme based on what you call crucible expeditions, which is this kind of outbound adventure. What inspired these crucible expeditions?
This is going to sound crazy, but the first book I wrote, The Littlest Green Beret, I remember thinking about writing that book when I was a teenager. I thought, I'm going to write a book about all this. And the picture of me getting my beret in front of Bronze Bruce. I remember I saw that picture and I'm like, if I ever write a book, that picture's going on the cover. And it did. But what I remember so much, so vividly, being a Florida boy, going through all this training basically in the winter, the first winter I ever went through. And I remember absolutely being cold, wet, tired, and miserable and hungry. But the learning was so accelerated. And when I got out of the military and I was still going to the woods, still doing all the things I did, I thought, this is the place to teach leadership. And I thought, if I ever achieve what I want to, a leadership development firm, I want a big component of that to be a wilderness expedition. 10 years ago, I created the Crucible expedition, and I decided it would be comprised of executives paired with military veterans who are transitioning out. The executives pay, the veterans do not pay. The executives basically get a digital detox. They get to slow down to speed up and really reflect on what's important. The military veterans that are transitioning are the ones that really learn a new vocabulary and learn, hey, what's it going to take to be successful in a completely different environment? We've done 25 of these over the last 10 years, probably had 250 people go through. We've done them from Argentina to Alaska. Most of it been in Colorado and Utah. And it's just such a privilege because what we can do in 4 days, I don't think we can do it in a year. A meeting once a month for 8 hours in a meeting room. I just think it's just amazing what we can do really fast.
So how many people would typically attend one of these events, the Crucible expeditions?
Usually the participants, it's usually, I would say 8 to 16. Probably the sweet spot's probably about 10. So we got 5 pairs, 5 executives, 5 veterans. We always have professional guides with us that are IFMGA certified. So the highest certification that you can have in the entire world for guiding. So we're safe. And anytime the ropes come out, the guides are in charge. They're the risk mitigators. And that's been a little tricky thing is how you have people that are also leaders, alpha people along, and then myself. And then we pick different leaders on different days, and not because we want them to learn about how to take people from point A to point B.
Right.
It's so that other people can watch them communicate, watch them decide, watch them collaborate. And then at night, that's what we get to talk about. We do an after action report or a debrief, postmortem. What was supposed to happen, what actually happened, what went well, what didn't, what do we need to do differently tomorrow? And that always leads into a topic of leadership and teamwork, always. And sometimes we have a fire when we have this discussion. Sometimes if we're in the middle of the desert, we got our hands. We're just warming our hands. But we always have a discussion at night. And a lot of times right on the trail, we'll have a teachable moment. We'll say, hey, what just happened here? This was a decision point. How did we approach this decision? And we'll really talk about that.
Got it. So the book is organized in what I would say the order of the phases of the expedition, right?
Correct.
It seems like it's a great way to organize the book. I do want to touch on a couple of chapters just to talk about. Some of them really interested me. You already touched on being squared away. I really appreciate that terminology of, as a leader, taking care of yourself and making sure all your stuff is taken care of. It seems like sometimes as a leader, we forget that we've got to not just wing it. And especially when it's like, oh, it's just my team. I'm not going to phone it in, but maybe a little less prep this time. What you talked about with respect to being a leader and being squared away is a great discipline, and really kind of reminds me that I owe it to these people to be squared away.
Right. And part of that's required, Peter, is you're going to have to sacrifice. If you're going to prepare, you got to get up earlier, or you've got to spend time reading and prepping. You have to sacrifice more than the people that are not in a leadership role. And if you're not prepared to do that, then don't raise your hand. And there's no way that you can lead a team and work less hours than your team. It cannot happen. And there's such a movement these days to how can I get the job done in the least amount of hours?
Right.
In this way, I actually make more money per hour. I'm more efficient. That's great if you're an individual contributor. But it might even be a good mentality for an entrepreneur. But if you're a leader, you cannot think that, because that's transactional thinking. I'm trading time for money. You're privileged and honored to lead people and change their lives. You've got to take that responsibility seriously. If you're the leader, you're one of the most important people in that person's life. You will be talked about at dinner every single night.
Right. In the chapters that you have here, I'm just going to read the chapter titles real quick, just because I think it'll give people that are listening just a brief overview of what we're talking about. So you've got selection, which is selecting people, preparation, the first encounter, movement, base camp, fireside chat, who's who, obstacles, rhythm, tribal connections, and the crux. And then the final chapter, the end is another beginning. And the next chapter that I wanted to talk to you about is the idea of the first encounter.
Yeah.
And the subtext of that is being authentic and vulnerable. I'm just curious, what role does vulnerability play?
I'll give you a story. One of the best leaders we ever had on the Crucible was a woman who was the chief compliance officer at Western Union. She was not an outdoorsy person. In fact, all her gear from REI was brand new. So we get out there, and one of the rules is, hey, if you feel something's not safe, say something. And we get to a point, and she said, if I fall here, I will die. And so there's a real difference in real risk and perceived risk. Her perceived risk was enormous. The real risk, the chance of her falling were pretty minimal. I mean, it was a wide trail. If she fell, yes, she might have died. Yes, she would have certainly gotten hurt. But I said, we can change the route. We can turn around. But before we do, are you going to be okay with that? The whole team's going to turn around. And she said, absolutely. And then we talked about, hey, before we turn around, what about all the times you ask people to do things that are scary, but they can't see it? And maybe you don't even know it. And I said, I want you to remember that. Anyway, we get down and I said, how you feeling about turn around? Because I thought for sure she was going to regret it. She's going to feel terrible. And she's like, good. And what I realized in that moment was her confidence allowed her to be vulnerable. Being vulnerable made her even more confident. And so people that say they don't want to be vulnerable, to me, in a lot of ways, they have some insecurities. They don't have the confidence. And it was her superpower. And literally anything, she was always the last one to speak. And whenever she spoke, everybody got super quiet. And she led that crucible, even though she wasn't the bravest, she wasn't the most experienced, but her confidence was off the charts. And she even risked when I remember somebody saying, I want to do this. And she said something to the effect like, what are you, crazy? Like, she had the confidence to basically call somebody out that she didn't even know. And to me, I almost saw this as like a self-perpetuating machine, that confidence and that vulnerability. And so that's really what I mean is when we first encounter, everybody's kind of feeling each other out. Who's going to be the first one that's vulnerable? Who's going to be the first one that lets people know who they really are and sort of sets the tone? And that was her.
Yeah. That, especially when you've got a group of sort of alpha-ish execs.
Oh, we had on that trip, we had a couple men that were from the most elite unit in the military, that some of them had been deployed 24 times, combat hundreds of times.
Yeah.
These were the males, the complete warriors, and they were perfectly fine being led by her.
Mm-hmm.
That, to me, I mean, that was remarkable, really remarkable. In fact, as I mentioned, the veterans that attend, most of them are people transitioning out of the military. One of those people was hired by this particular woman based on that trip, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I like that. The next chapter I wanted to mention, and I hope you're okay with me just kind of skipping through the chapters here, but there were just some things that really picked up on. Chapter 4, movement, setting direction, pace and tone. And as a leader, I've found that keeping my team moving, it's critical to keep the team moving at a strong pace. There's just so many distractions. And I just find movement to be just one of the most critical things to running my small marketing organization. But in that, you talk about movement, setting direction, pace, and tone. What is the importance of direction in an expedition setting, and how does that translate into business?
Well, I'll give you the example. So I remember one of the guys, 2015, really strong, young, very confident person. And he said, okay, gang, we're going to this summit and let's go. And I let him go. And I was with him and I I remember I said, "Hey, Josh, turn around." And he turns around and he goes, "Oh, crap."
Nobody behind him.
Right. Exactly. So the direction was clear. The pace was unreasonable because on a mountain, you can only go as fast as your slowest person. Well, in the work world, the direction can be clear, but gosh, how in the world do we figure out the pace when you've got people all over the world if you're not talking to them all the time? In fact, on the expeditions, what's interesting is the leader could say, "Hey, we're going to stop every 45 minutes and take a break for 10 minutes." And whatever that leader communicates to the people every 45 minutes is never enough. Like, how long are we stopping for? Can I pee? Can I get some food? Can I treat my blisters? What's the weather ahead? How much more elevation? When are we going to get to camp? Are we going to be able to build a fire? The, and then I say to them, "All right, you have one 15-minute stand up a week. You think that's enough for people to know what's going on?" And then here's the other part, what I think is the most important concept of direction, pace, and tone. So Josh gets them to the top of the mountain. All right. How do they feel? They're ragged. They're beaten. What if Josh says, this is a false summit. We got to go up higher. The team's going to go, "The heck with you," and they'll mutiny. And that translates to the business world. Our direction is a number. The pace is quarterly or monthly. We got to hit a number. The tone is, how do you want people to feel? And because we know the next quarter, you got to do it all over again. And are people anxious? Are they going, "I hit my number 6 months into the year, I'm going to coast"? Um, and so I don't find very many leaders that are intentional about tone. Hey, I'm going to lead them. Here's where we're going. Here's the pace. Here's how I want them to feel along the way. Very few leaders go into meetings saying, "Hey, this is how I want people to feel." And if you're not thinking that way, you're not really capturing hearts and minds, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. We have core values. We were just a tiny little company, but early on in our evolution, one of the team members who was kind of the junior member of the team really pushed me to be intentional about my leadership in the organization. One of the things we came up with was our core values for the team. One of our core values is great team vibe.
Mm-hmm.
It means, are we actually authentically getting along? And it's not to say that we all have to be exactly on the same page outside of the office or anything like that. But when we're doing our job, how are we doing it? What is that vibe? And that has really served us well as a team, just to state that, to keep the cohesiveness of the team and to make us do great things. Is there anything else in movement any other points that you want to make today?
On the movement, it's really about intentionality. Again, I really believe that this leadership thing is really balancing results and relationships. I mean, and again, the job is to get things done through other people. So we have to influence them, and hopefully we're able to inspire them. Again, that tone is just so important. And I talk to a lot of organizations about their culture and remind them that your culture is oftentimes by default. It is what it is. And it's not by design. And because people aren't intentional about, again, how they want people to feel, what it's like to work here, what it's like to be a customer for that company, white glove, high touch, whatever it might be. It doesn't mean you have to be namby-pamby with people and cater and bow down to them. I mean, you can still coach them hard and try to move them to their highest potential. I mean, people want that. Most people want growth and development and to be challenged. But this relationship and results thing is the art of leadership. It's never in perfect balance. And the great leaders are hyper self-aware, and they're constantly adjusting that scale so that not too much empathy in relationship and not too much driving people to exhaustion
Authority
and burnout.
Yeah.
And we talk in the book a little bit about the whole idea of, like, again, the way to say that and really succinctly is stretch people without breaking them. And it's hard. I mean, if we had the recipe, we would write the final book on leadership. But there's 40,000 books out there and everybody's got a different take on how to do it. And I think the key as a leader is you're constantly learning, you're staying curious, you're driven, and you're reading things that really speak to you and to the nuggets that you can take away and put into practice. And if you're early as a leader, the books you read are really formative, because you'll find that the more leadership books you read, the more you realize there are different variations on the same theme.
Mm-hmm.
And again, my perspective really comes from the expeditions, the crucible of really facing adversity. And I think my TED talk was on when you create your own crucible, you change your narrative. And we can create crucibles for ourselves, or crucibles can be thrown in our path. But I kind of go back to Bill George, who wrote Authentic Leadership, when he found that great leaders had one thing in common. They were constantly testing themselves and reframing their life story. And I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to constantly test ourselves. We've got to face our own hypocrisy, because we're going to ask people to do things that we don't do so great, or we've screwed up, or we don't do consistently. We've got to face our own hypocrisy, and we've got to constantly reframe our story and know that we don't have it all figured out, and we make mistakes and we lose trust. And the hard lesson I learned as a CEO was my intentions did not matter. I had the best of intentions. I was there for the people. I was not there for me, and it did not matter. All that mattered was my words and my deeds. And I was not given grace for my intentions as a CEO.
Yeah.
And nor should I have been. I mean, it's about words and deeds. And that was a tough lesson. I did not learn from a book or from a mentor. I learned from screwing up.
One, just a couple in closing. I'm curious how you measure the success of the expedition, and kind of related to that, am I going to be able to get these lessons without actually doing my own crucible? It seems like I'm really dying to go out and do this, but
that's why we wrote the book, because we know the crucibles don't scale. And that is literally when one of my mentors asked me, "Why do you want to write another book?" And I said, "I want to help more people." And he goes, "Haven't you already helped people?" Yeah, but I said, this doesn't scale, and I want to basically put a stake in the ground. Hey, after 10 years, here's what we learned. Hopefully this thing lives long after me, and that they can say, hey, this is where it started. Here's how we built on it. But we really do think that you can learn a lot from the book. I mean, that's why we wrote it. When I come out of an expedition, I can tell you exactly on the drive home by myself. I'm always by myself on the drive home. And I'm doing an after action review, and I'm going through each person. Did we meet their expectations? Who do I think got the most benefit out of this trip? Did I change somebody's life? In fact, I interviewed a guy today that, I mean, it was on LinkedIn Live and it's on YouTube, but I interviewed him today, Dan Morostica. And of all the people that have gone over 10 years, his life changed the most. He wasn't fit. He decided to get fit. He's climbed 19 14ers here in Colorado since that crucible. He's gotten healthy. He's taken his family. He got two big, huge promotions where his career was sort of just chugging along. That crucible changed his life, which is really cool. Does it change everybody's? Of course not. But I always look at it and I always think, who's changed the most? And of course, we have a post-crucible survey that we ask people to fill out, and we look at that. But the other thing that we did in getting ready for the book, or to write the book, is my co-author interviewed a lot of people that were past participants, and we grabbed their stories. And that was validation that there's two experiences with the crucible. There's the experience while they're out there. And again, some of it might be cold, wet, tired. They're never hungry, but cold, wet, tired. Or where it may, hey, this isn't that fun when the wind's whipping and it's cold. And then there's the after effect when they get to reflect on it. And then they look at their pictures and they're like, man, I can't believe we're in that gorgeous place. And they process it. I've had two people that were absolutely miserable and really miserable on the crucible, and let me know it, that it was not meeting their expectations. And both those gentlemen, I could tell you, as they reflected, they looked back and went, yeah, I could have behaved a lot differently, but here's what I took away. Here's what I learned about myself. And that was also validation. But the other thing, Peter, and this is the last thing I'll say, is I've never come out of a crucible and felt like I as a leader, earned an A+. I mean, every time I've come out of a crucible, I thought, I'll give myself an A for the design. I designed a really great environment for great things to happen. I give myself an A on design. On the actual leading and interacting with people and all that out there, I always feel I should step back even more. I've gotten better at letting things just happen, but it's hard. It's really hard to just let things percolate and happen and be in the background.
Let mistakes be made, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard, but that's a really good question. I've never been asked that one before, Peter.
The book is available for pre-sale.
Yep, it's on anywhere you buy a book. It's out there. It's through Bembella Books, distributed by Penguin Random House. So it's everywhere you get your books. And yeah, pre-order now and then for sale August 20th. And if anybody's interested in the workbook or the assessment, which is a little extra things that we've got, just send me a note and correspond with me directly, and I can get you some extra goodies for listening to this podcast. I'll be glad to do that.
Excellent. Thank you, Jan. Remind me the website again as well.
Self-ReliantLeadership.com. Self-ReliantLeadership.com.
Got it. And you, in addition to the crucibles, you are also a management consultant.
Yeah, executive coach.
Leadership.
Work with a lot of leaders, mainly at the C-suite level.
Mm-hmm.
And again, what a privilege it is to work with people and try to help them be more effective leaders, better, so they can create better teams.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, and can't wait to see the book out in the wild, and wish you all the best success with that.
Thanks, Peter. It was a privilege. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Biz and Life Done Well with Peter Wilson. You can subscribe to us on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and most of the other popular podcast platforms. Please tell your friends about us and leave us a review so even more people will find out about us. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.